Good morning, all. Visit Orlando, the whole Orlando crew. We're glad to have you here for the Orlando tech community. Good morning. I'm Paul Coulter, and along with Bob Reed from Starter Studio, we have the pleasure of hosting the tenX Talks this morning, where we have an esteemed panel, and we're going to talk and discuss about selecting your founding team. So very excited to dive into that. But we also have a very exciting day here at 36 West Pine, where we have a large celebration. And I wanted to kick that over to David to discuss what's going on this morning.
Yeah, really cool. Paul has got this whole DJ vibe thing going
Yes,
on.
they do.
Really, really cool, by the way. So good morning, everyone. David Adelson, CEO of Innovate Orlando and the Orlando tech community. Really excited to have all of you on this chat today. We have a great panel, and thank you, Bob and Paul and Ken for kicking these off on a bi-weekly basis. Just really important for our community to hear the stories. But today we're at 36 West Pine, now to be known as the Tech Hub Orlando. If you are familiar with the location, it is an amazing building. We are doing a ribbon cutting today. And inside of this building, it hosts the Orlando tech community. It has OMG Labs, Florida High Tech Corridor, UCF Incubator, and Starter Studio. And what that means is that this building really effectively becomes a community building for our tech and innovation ecosystem and really for our entrepreneurial community. So today we'll be doing a ribbon cutting. It does start in and around 10 o'clock. So if you're in the area, please stop on by and hear some amazing words from some of our esteemed leaders that get to drool on a mic for a little bit. But more importantly, what happens next after today is really just a community area where the Orlando tech community can really begin to have a place to call home and really begin to have meetings moving forward.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to see what's growing here in Orlando, and I know what's coming down the pipe with the new venue downtown, and this is a good first step towards that. So as we get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. We have four great panelists. We'll talk about them and their accomplishments. I'm going to start with Carrie Lane. Carrie's a founder and business strategist that helps entrepreneurs grow to scale faster than they could have on their own. She's taken 3 companies IPO and brought founding teams to from their infancy to over 5 billion in revenue. She's coached hundreds of executives and recently joined Crummer as head of strategic partnerships for executive innovation. So welcome, Carrie. We're very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Sherry Constantini, I want to recognize her. She's a legend in the Orlando community. Before exiting Avant Healthcare, she helped them grow 38% from inception to that exit point. But most recently, she was highlighted as the winner for the Orlando Startup World Cup, where she and her co-founder went out to Silicon Valley to represent our community. We're very excited to have her here as one of the founders of Kismet Technologies. So welcome, Sherry. And James Hawley is a successful entrepreneur who co-founded his first company, which was an IT staffing firm. He took it to over 1,000 employees and 100 million in revenue before being acquired by a $5 billion company. He's helped a number of startups in the community and recently launched Next Path Career Partners, was just awarded as one of the top 5 fastest growing staffing firms in the nation. So we're excited to have him here and talk about human capital, especially that mix of getting the right founding team. And we're glad to have you here, James. And then Rick Brenner is a serial entrepreneur who has taken multiple companies from startup to exit, including Pure Cycles Technologies, which met and exceeded the venture target of creating companies valued at 1 billion within 5 years. That's a quick flip where you definitely need the right team from the get-go, right? And Rick co-founded Inventure, which went public on the NASDAQ last month. So congratulations on that big accomplishment. I know it's something to be respected here in the Orlando community. So thank you for joining us, Rick.
Thanks.
Well, to kick this off, I
Very
want to
much.
give everybody
Great
an
to be here.
opportunity just to give a elevator pitch and give you context from where they come from and how they contribute to the community. So Rick, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Great to be here. And when I left Procter and Gamble, I joined my first early stage company, which is half owned by P&G, and it positively ruined me for the rest of my career. So I've been an early stage pre and post IPO person forever. And I'll tell you what, a year ago, when I started to do my wind down from and wind up with Brenner Innovation, I started to get to know this community in terms of the passion to figure out how to do things better, smarter, faster. And that really was sort of the beginning of getting to know this group and a lot of people that aren't on this call. And we did a event with KPMG and Brenner Innovation in late September that was a health innovation summit, and it was just amazing to see just the brain power and collaboration. Very excited to be part of the future of what's going on in Orlando. It is really a fun moment in time.
I agree. It's great to be here in Central Florida. James, how about you next?
Paul, it looks like the internet connection here may be a little wonky.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Yeah. Hey, everyone. As opposed to, Paul just did a great intro. So thanks, Paul, for kind of, bragging on some of the success that my team has had over the years. But, just being an entrepreneur, I want to really, say kudos to the ecosystem. When I started back in the day, there really was no support system. It was just figure it out on your own. And the amount of resources that are available to the startups today, it's absolutely amazing. So I want to give props to the teams that have been doing that, whether it's Startup Studio, OTC. I mean, just the entire network is so strong. And I've seen it move the needle the last 8 years, 10 years. OEP's done a great job. I mean, ultimately, this is a thriving marketplace, and it took a lot of people to do that. So very happy to be part of this group today, discussion, and air the laundry, the good, the bad, the ugly, mistakes we've made. I mean, we all see successes on social media, but it's like an artist that suddenly seems like they've struck gold. There was a lot of work behind the scenes that you just don't see. And so that's what these are about. And I think it's awesome that we're having these type of conversations. So looking forward to it.
Oh, and I love that insights. It'll help the early stage founders. You all have had some great success, and it'll be very informational and educational. So, Carrie, how about you next?
Good morning. Thank you all for having me again. I'm super excited to be here. We were talking before we actually went live and just talking about how founders are built differently, right? Like we are cut from a totally different cloth to be able to have the fortitude and sustain some of the things that we've seen. And I laugh looking back and think about my journey helping companies grow from very, very small early on stages through some incredible trajectory that are things that when you're sitting front row with popcorn, you do see the underbelly, right? You do see all the things behind the scenes. But when I opened my own companies and I became a founder, that was absolutely mind-blowing to me. It felt completely different than all the hundreds of executives that I had coached go through it. And when it's you versus you, it is a completely different story and a completely different journey. And I remember feeling incredibly alone and incredibly isolated and terrified. And even though I had done this front row with popcorn for other companies and sat on C-suites and on boards and on investor teams helping them, once it was my own, it was one of the hardest things that I've ever made the decision to do. But with that said, some of the people on this call and the community that Orlando has built over time, they were the ones that really kind of kept me going, kept my mindset right, kept me in the game. And one of the things that I learned most, and to what James's point was that we're excited to share our stories with you, but it doesn't fail and it doesn't not work unless you quit, right? And so if you just keep going, the world is really there, right there in front of you. And with communities like this, it makes a big difference. So most recently, I've joined Crummer to be able to help connect the community, the alumni, and the executive education opportunities that Crummer brings to what we're talking about as we continue to build the Central Florida area and rise up the leaders that are here. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. And Sherry, tell us a little bit about you.
I founded Avant Healthcare Professionals, a company that I had for 18 years. I had angel private equity, and then it did a strategic recap prior to exiting that business in 2021. We grew that to $175 million, and it was the largest international healthcare staffing company in the country at the time that I exited it. I'll just say it sure was nice to have Trump win this time and not lose a deal that was on the table, because I lived at the crossroads of healthcare and immigration. And we were 75 days into diligence and lost a deal that was heavily connected into the Democratic Party. So I thought, after spending 18 years at the crossroads of healthcare and immigration, I'd pick something a little bit easier and go into a tech startup that actually is not easier. It's just a whole different set of challenges. That's where I am now with Kismet Technologies. We are a material technology company. We have a innovative technology that provides antimicrobial properties and is really unique within the $6 billion antimicrobial additive market in terms of the properties that it brings to various applications.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And what I think is most compelling, Sherry, is about your story of how you and Christina came to be and came to build Kismet. So maybe, Carrie talked about how sometimes when you're a founder and you feel a little bit alone, but you have the Orlando tech community. I want to hear a little bit more about how you found your connection in the right spot within the ecosystem.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, Christina and I both met each other through the community. Kismet, Christina had started and found space in a home with UCF in the incubator, had leveraged a lot of resources within the community, including the Florida High Tech Corridor and Senfluence. And as I mentioned earlier, I had exited my business in 2021. I've actually been very active in the community, giving back to entrepreneurs since about 2012. I've seen all the iterations of different organizations that are here, including the Orlando tech community, over all those years. And so it is very encouraging, to Rick's point, to see where the community has come over those years. But I was very active in the Entrepreneurs Alliance of Orlando. That organization was around for about 5 years, 5 or 6 years. It was a group of experienced entrepreneurs that wanted to give back to help novice entrepreneurs learn from them and from their lessons learned, and hopefully have a little bit easier path along the way. And so Christina and I were connected through the Entrepreneurs Alliance. I started advising her and Kismet. The initial path for Kismet was to create end products, which we do have end products that provide residual antimicrobial protection to surfaces. And so given the importance of that in healthcare, especially reducing healthcare acquired infections, I certainly saw the potential for this technology very quickly. And so I went from an advisor to a co-founder in the company, officially joining in the summer of 2022. Because of my experience, I knew that there were a couple things we needed right away. We needed a really good CFO. I didn't know that the first time I founded a business. It wasn't until I raised private equity that my private equity partner said, "You need a good CFO, and you don't know what that is until you have it." And so I certainly learned that at Avant and was able to bring somebody out of retirement to join us. So it was Christina, very strong scientific background, the inventor of the technology, me more on sales and business. and then Spence, who joined us as the CFO. We brought on another really critical technology partner who had more of the manufacturing and scaling technology and scaling the various technical applications. And so the four of us really have been a pretty well-rounded initial team, and now we're building it out from there.
It's definitely important to have the balance and have each of those, people in the right seat on the bus. And James, you had an interesting story about building your company and getting the right team and putting that together. You wanna tease us with that?
Yeah, I mean, this topic is so important because it's like at the end of the day, your product is important. You're solving an issue for a customer, or client, and that's your business, right? And the actual idea could be spot on, but who you surround yourself at the end of the day, to me, it makes or breaks the business, right? Because having the right co-founders, I mean, it's a marriage. In some ways, I think it's more complicated than marriage, to be honest. Just because that's where you're spending every waking moment, right? You're just putting such investment into, like trying to grow something and build something. And so it's like a foundation. You can't build a high rise if it's a weak foundation. And that's what your co-founders are. Quick story I was telling Paul is when we started our first company, I did everything as a team. I hate being alone. I like being with people. And so we actually had 5 co-founders in our first startup. And I mean, it was tough. It was 2001. It was 9/11. Like it was not the right time to be in IT. And that's when we launched. And so we did that. And on paper, one of our partners, who's one of my great friends, and I had known him for a while, he seemed like a plug and play. He was going to be fantastic at the business, but he just didn't have the stomach for it. And I think resiliency in a co-founder is so important because the tough times are going to come. Has this person faced adversity? And this person hadn't. And when he faced that, he ultimately said, peace out. I don't want to be a part of this. And it really disrupted our business. And it was something that I didn't see coming at all, right? It was someone I knew. And so then we were like 4 individuals strong. And we came out of that a lot stronger. And we also, the second go around when we launched NextPath, found the right co-founders to be a part of, the founding members. And we knew that they had faced adversity. They'd been through recessions. They'd been through tough times. So I think as you're looking for a co-founder, it's really important, not just to look on paper, their attributes and skill sets, can they plug into the right things you want? But it's important to know that they understand how tough this is going to get. And that, Carrie said it earlier, like it is a lonely journey because at the end of the day, nobody's going to hand you anything. You've got to earn every bit of your success. And not everyone has the stomach for that. And that's okay. Some people should be employees. Some people should be entrepreneurs. And I think it's important to take inventory of that as you're choosing the right person to partner with. Because, I mean, it could cost you the entire business if you pick wrong.
No, the importance of laying the foundation is paramount. And Carrie, why don't you talk about how you've helped support some companies do that, and even in your own company with your own platform that you've launched, how did you navigate that selection from the get-go?
I'm thinking, James, about what you said about it's almost like a marriage of sorts. And when I think about owners and founders raising businesses, it is much like children. You raise it to let it go at a certain point, right? And you have to do that with people that surround you that have your back. I know the team that I have for the one tech platform that we built. I'll tell you about how we met in a minute, but ultimately, I know without a doubt we have each other's back. And it's hard enough being a founder and a co-founder, but when you can't unequivocally say that that person has the business best interest in mind, your best interest in mind, the team's best interest in mind, there's enough stress and pressure as it is. You don't want a fractured relationship to be at that foundation. And so, I mean, they're the ones that know what keeps me up at night, and I know what keeps them up at night, and more so to a depth than any other relationship I've ever had. It's intense. And so the selection and the timing of when you bring them on is also really important. So from the tech perspective, somebody, the consulting business that I founded, KLES, I brought with me somebody that had worked with me through the prior IPOs. So he had a 15-year relationship. We knew we were like already lock in step. And it's one of those situations where I picked up the phone. I felt very alone. I was 3 months in and I called him to tell him, I think I made the wrong decision. It's like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And he's like, nope. And I was like, well, maybe if we did it together. And he's like, when do you want me to start? And he left the other journey that he had come on, and we joined pretty early. And that was somebody that like was in my pack. And so it made me feel really good and kind of gave us some of that extra fortitude and fuel. And then because of networking and because of being out front and center, which as founders and owners, you're constantly needing to do, I was introduced to our other partner who has just, when you talk about universal alignment, just told the team, I was like, guys, I can't keep doing everything all the time. Like I'm burning out and I am just exhausted. And we need somebody that can help us open doors and can help us market and sell and really kind of take lead on the commercial entry into these markets that we're in. And that next day I was introduced to our third partner, who comes from a really critical strategic part of the business that we were missing. And it's not just sales, it was the relationships network and the prowess that he had built over time in his career. And so I think the other thing about looking for it is not only people that have your backs, but people that bring certain doors of entry that you couldn't otherwise get on your own. That's really important to make sure that you've got all of your bases covered. So I don't know if that helps with a little bit of background story. And one thing I will add too, not that I want to be the Debbie Downer on the call, but we get called in a lot to fix companies that make this decision wrong. And when it's set up poorly and we have to go in and unwind it or restructure it or reframe it or rebuild relationships that have been broken, those stories are really, really gut wrenching. And they are really hard to navigate and painful for everybody. So I think a lot of the advice that'll be given on the call today is to hopefully help you avoid some of that too. So.
Yeah, no, actually, as we were talking before, James had mentioned, making the wrong choice can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, not only the heartache, but the economics of it too. But I want to roll over to Rick. If you're taking a company from 0 to a billion, I mean, how critical is that foundation in getting the right people in the right spot?
Yeah, I want to build on what Carrie said, because I do think this is a question of how do you get co-founders engaged that really share your vision, and I think really importantly, bring kind of complementary skills. I know when Mike, John, and I talked about creating Inventure, we had all worked together at Excel Tech Group, which was the precursor to Inventure. We knew each other, we knew our strengths, we knew kind of how each other operated. John was a scientific genius, literally a rocket scientist. Mike was a deep strategy guy and unbelievable at articulating stories. And my sort of passion has been operational excellence for a long time. And how do you build that into enterprises that are really built to last? So I think getting the three of us together and kind of knowing each other well got us started well. We convinced P&G to license PureCycle to us and to entrust us with their family jewels as part of the start of Inventure. And I think there's something others have hit on, which is it's one thing to have core founders that are complementary and aligned on the vision and able to work closely together. But as these companies scale, equally important is how do you bring people in? How do you make sure that they are in a place that they can really win? Somebody mentioned the sort of right people on the bus and the right seats. And I think one of the things I've seen over the course of startups that I've been intimately engaged in is oftentimes you get people into enterprises, especially people early in their career, and it takes some time to figure out exactly where they fit. So, being able to give people a chance to work in various places and sort of learn different parts. And, I think for me, the biggest passion of all of this is seeing people that have grown and developed and created, lives for themselves beyond what they envisioned because they were willing to go on the nearly impossible ride of doing startups. So I am always looking for people that have got that DNA because it is hard to find and fun to cultivate.
For sure, for sure. Well, as you're putting together the team, obviously you need the complementary skill sets. You need the mindset of grit to push through that. How do you qualify or screen those individuals? I know a couple of you had people you've worked with before to create that core, But beyond that, anybody have a recommendation on how you screen and qualify somebody maybe unknown that you're trying to bring in?
I'll jump in really quick because I wish my partner was on to share the story because he tells it way better than I do. But even though he had a tremendous really reputation as being a titan in the industry, I didn't know him. And I knew how careful the selection process had to be. And I was nervous because I didn't, when you're running in a pack and you're running like locked step, lock in arms, you want to know that that person's going to run through brick walls with you, right? So I started to call everybody that I knew in my network that knew him. And I knew more about him than I think he even realized by the time we had our first phone call. But what I was checking was character, values. Is he willing to always be educated? Because it was an industry crossover. So can we learn from one another? And I think that what I heard about him that was most impressive and really got me was he won't join things and he won't do it unless he knows it will be a success. So I thought that was a really interesting parameter because here I was trying to be successful. I knew that person shared the same level and tenacity for success. But the things that people in his sphere had shared about him really gave me kind of that under the cloak like perspective of who he was as an individual and the values that somebody brings to their life and to their relationships and to the brand that they've built and the network that they've nurtured really matters because that's how they're going to bring it into your world when you decide to join. And so I think doing some of that cross-checking early on and really testing the pressure for the values piece and how they build relationships will tell you who and how they're going to be with you when you do ultimately select who they are.
Yeah. And Carrie, maybe just to build on that, because I think a tactic that I've used over the years and have become a big believer in this is the try before you buy plan. So, one of the things that we've done a lot of is finding folks that look good. And Carrie, I wish I had your level of rigor in figuring out whether somebody was right. I think I maybe have used the tactic of try before you buy as a chance to try to figure out. I think I need to see you in action as opposed to further figuring out what I can in an interview process. So, for me, the try before you buy piece includes consulting firms. I don't know how many of you have used consulting firms. And, one of the things that I believe is a large portion of what you get out of consulting firms, you often get in the first 60 to 90 days. And so, kind of having a thing where you say, I'm not making lifetime decisions here, I'm making the next right decision. I think you can learn a lot about people you're going to hire. You can learn a lot about consultants and partners that you're going to rely on to scale companies. So I would urge you guys as you look at this to think about, who are the people in your network that are maybe only partly available. I would not get scared away with that. I think that could be a plus.
Yeah. I mean, there's people that practice well and there's people that play well. So the reality is you want to see how they do on the field because when the clock's running and the pressure is on, that's when they need to perform versus somebody that like interviews fantastic, which we've all done that before, made the wrong hires. So the other thing I would add to this, I think the person, the DNA, the skill set, so important. They've got to check the right boxes. But having been in hiring for 30 years, to me, the secret weapon is timing. The best candidate, the best place do not come together because of timing. So my hack that I always tell our clients is it's ABC. Always be cultivating, always be interviewing, always be talking, always be thinking, would I work with this person? Could I hire this person? And I would even challenge to be opportunistic that maybe the timing of a business isn't perfect, but the right person, right, at the right time, I think ultimately is what you should go after. And reverse back engineer, how do I get this person into my organization? Because they're a game changer. So I would say the timing is so critical that just don't open up a window because in that window, the best candidate may not be the right candidate.
And James, you had another really interesting point. A lot of people that jump into early stage companies or get into business get in for different reasons or different drivers in their own life. You mentioned something about screening the co-founder motivations. You want to enlighten us a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean it's tough, and there's so many good ways to do it. I'm sure these guys can share some ideas too. But I mean, to me, it's you've got to find that adversity that they had. The best people that I've hired that have been the most successful have been through some challenges, and you just got to like tap into that. It may be professional challenges, it may just be personal, right? grab lunch, grab dinner, get out into a very comfortable setting to have conversations and get folks to open up as you talk through, you'll find some adversity. Maybe it's they grew up in, it was a single parent household. Their mom worked like crazy and they had to go get a job through high school. They had to put themselves through college. It could be as simple as grinding through that. That I want to hear those stories. Like I want to know that you're battle tested, because let's face it, entrepreneurship, startups, founding something, you are going to war, right? It's metaphorical, but you are going to war. And when the bullets start flying, I want to know that this person is not going that direction. They're with me going this direction. And I think you've got to tap into that. And you've got to figure out what life challenges they've had, and not the superficial, canned, they were told this was a good, thing to say in an interview, but really dig deeper, spend more time. And then your gut. I mean, there's so much science out there, so much data, but I could find any data that backs up my opinion. Let's face it, right? There's plenty of information out there. Your gut tells you. And there's no one that I hired, anyone that I was on the fence on and I hired, I made a mistake. I should have trusted my gut. We feel it, we know it. And to Rick's point, early on, it too in those first 90 days. So you've got to be able to pull that ripcord as fast as possible so that it doesn't kind of poison the well, right? It could really, take your business offline, and it's just too critical. You got to make quick decisions when it's not right.
Yeah, one thing I've heard consistently, and I'll just jump right over to Sherry in a sec here, is you want to try before you buy. You want to get slow on the entry, and then you want to fire quickly if there's a mistake. But Sherry, you were talking about, you have something to add, but you were also talking about the advisor strategy, the board strategy when we were talking before. Maybe you want to enlighten us with that, because that is a part of the whole ecosystem and the founding strategy, right?
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I'd throw on that, since you asked that question, is, what I will say is that having good foundational pieces of good legal advice, how you set up the company is key. Rick and I were connected through somebody we both think is like one of the top lawyers. It's not easy to find good lawyers, good accountants, things like that. And when you find them, they're good as gold. And mine's been, the mutual friend we have, I've been working with since 2003. So I would say that I think, having good board members, I brought a board member to Kismet from Avant, just having those good people around. We just went through, as we've made a pivot in our business, bringing on a consultant, and, we found that after 60, 90 days, I think we had gotten all we could from this person. And then it was, and then when I kind of gave him that notice, he's like, well, you didn't ask for this, and that's not what you were paying for. And I'm like, well, if you don't come out of the gate strong, then you're off the team, right? And then the other thing I was going to add is, to me, one of the things that's really critical in building a company, over time is having good disciplines around strategy, team dynamics, working through those challenging situations. Because no matter, even if you have a great group of people, we know each other really well, we've worked together before, people have different stressors in life. And you're all going to be stressed at certain times. And how do you react to other people? How do you support them? How do they support you? So, I would say really having some discipline around the team is important.
Sherry, let me build on that, because I think one of the things, P&G did a really interesting thing in the 70s. They discovered this manufacturing process called OGSM, Objectives, Goals, Strategies, and Measures, and figured out that it was more than just what you could use in manufacturing. They basically mapped out the entire P&G business on one-page strategy documents. And I think the ability to get an early stage team figuring out what is the objective that we're going after and how do we measure success over time? What are the strategies that are required to get there? And what are the metrics that say we're on track? one of the things, and we've done this with all the startup companies I've been involved in, it gets everybody not just on the same page and contributing to what it is, but it helps people appreciate what the people outside their function are doing and to see this as a collaborative entity. Because one of the things we had one of these sort of sunset reviews of something that happened. And I think one of the things one of the folks mentioned was, knowing what the other guys were actually doing really helped me not to make this any worse, because I understood who I needed to go to and I understood what their metrics were that I was actually a part of, even though I didn't see that as primary. So I think the part of this of really saying what's the endpoint we're going after and how do you kind of keep measuring every month or every quarter to make sure we're on track, I think oftentimes in early stage companies is a missed art. And as a result, you can get a lot of drift and a lot of sort of behaviors and actions that don't necessarily get you to where you want to go. So I am a big fan of that. And I think as David and I have started Brenner Innovation, that's part of what we try to bring to companies is how do you not just create the right sort of strategy, but how do you create the right approach so that you can create a living, breathing document that people know what they're going after and are measured against and rewarded for that. That I think has worked across time and across companies for us.
I'd like to jump in on that too. I think what you're talking about is so true. And what we've been through, people think it's linear, right? You think you're going from point A to point B, but it's not. It's a playground. You got swings, you got slides, you have jungle, like the monkey bars. You might even have a splash pad in it. I don't know. But either way, go straight way from here to there. And everybody could be playing at any part of it at any point. I think one of the things that we've learned to focus on, and when we coached some of the executives and early on founders, we created a framework, the 4 key things that bring people closer to that connectivity point. And we focus on alignment, communication, conflict, and change management. At every stage and at every next level you reach, whether it's employee count, whether it's product development, whether it's sales, you are going to have to reevaluate all of those things because they are different in every case scenario. So as a team, the emotional intelligence aspect of it is super important, as is the behavioral IQ. And so that's what we focus on with our founding team and with the ones that we educate through our masterminds is those 4 concepts. It's behavioral IQ.
And
That's
Carrie,
awesome.
you're really an expert in the space in terms of human capital alignment, strategy for growth, taking companies to the next stage. Talk to us a little bit about how creating that right culture plays such a role into the longevity of an organization and the efficiency of the growth.
It's huge. We just left a workshop last week for a firm, and I loved one of the things that the founder said. He said, you could be a $10 million producer, but if you're not doing it our way with our values, you're not on this team doing it. And I think that the value structure and the core values of the team and the culture that you create, it's what happens when nobody's looking, right? It goes back to integrity, personal integrity, team integrity, company integrity. And I think that the fracturing that I've seen is when people start saving themselves or start getting really siloed because they get hyper protective of what their mission is and they lose sight of the end goal of what the ultimate culture needs to be in order to sustain through some of those hard times. And so if you're not willing to hire by culture and value fit and fire by culture and value fit, you can get knocked off those rails, like James was saying, way too quickly. And you might not even see it happening as it's happening. And that's one of the scarier parts. And so I don't know if that helps answer your question, but it is incredibly important.
Rick, you were also talking about the importance of culture creation. Do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think, and Carrie, I love the way that you've articulated that. I definitely want to kind of dive deeper into the depth you're thinking at this. I would say the culture piece of this is, that old strategy of a culture eats strategy for lunch. And I do think that at the end of the day, that, culture is something that you can't just go through an exercise and say, these are the cultural principles and this is how we behave and all that. I think to Carrie's point, it's about the senior leadership embracing that and positively reinforcing when people are displaying it and providing the appropriate corrective feedback when they're not. And to the extent that they are not able to, I think to Carrie's point, it doesn't matter how great you are if you can't play within the sandbox that the founders and the team have concluded is the way we operate. And I just want to kind of build one other thing. There is no replacement for pristine, ethical, thinking and behavior among our leaders. And I think a lot of times we can get sucked into, I need this skill set so bad, I'm willing to put up with X. And I would just say, do not do that.
I could not agree more. And I wanted to say more and more, it seems that investors are looking at that founding team and looking to qualify that before they put their money in. Sherry, I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that the team and the team dynamics are just really central to the success. I told my co-founder, this is her first company, when I joined the company, and she had an employee who was marginal at best. I said, one lesson that I learned, and somebody told me that this very early on in my career, is companies don't get in trouble for, firing too soon. They get in trouble for firing too late. And, it took me a while to really learn that. And many of those lessons learned were the hard way. But I think that point's been highlighted here. And I really like that idea of trying the fit. And I always tell people when I'm hiring, it's important for the fit to work on both sides of the equation. If you're not excited to be here, we're not excited to have you here, that it's not going to work well. But again, the discipline of bringing that team together, to Rick's point, we grew Avant when the visas for nurses came back in 2015 from 23 million to 175 million in 2021. And in order to achieve that kind of sustainable growth, you have to be very disciplined. It was 90-day strategic planning. We had goals, we had numbers, we reevaluated things every 90 days. And each of those sessions included time for the team dynamics, working on the team, some really hard activities, right? Nobody likes to, say vulnerability, but it's really important to be able to model that for your team and to be able to create those authentic relationships.
Well, in terms of authenticity, how do you navigate disagreements? Obviously, there's the value standpoint, right? If there's a value fracture, you can point to that easily and get resolution more quickly. But how do you navigate the other strategic disagreements or just friction that may evolve as growth happens?
Well, I'm a follower of Pat Lencioni, and the way he kind of approaches teams and team dynamics, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, having trust as your foundation for the team. So I would say that if you are building a team based on trust, you're building a team where disagreement is, and it's maybe not disagreement, it's differing opinions, right? That is something that you're welcoming. And if people aren't sharing their different opinions, that's a problem, because not everyone's going to agree all the time. So I think you have to kind of create that culture, that environment that invites differing opinions and consensus, because you're not going to get an agreement, right? Sometimes you agree and you support the decision, and sometimes you disagree and support the decision. But at the end of the day, the team emerges in support.
Right.
Yeah,
Rick, do you have some more?
Thing on the vulnerability side, just real quick, and that is, I think, especially for early stage companies, mistakes and pivots are part of the world. And I think one of the things is leaders of these early stage companies that is important is to be able to kind of have a model. We use sunset reviews as, this went wrong. Let's get everybody together. Let's talk about how we could do this differently, because I think part of vulnerability is being able to look at yourself and look at the team and say, where did we miss and what do we need to do differently? So I just would add that as something in the toolkit as people look at how do you deal with these. Unfortunately, it's unavoidable to make mistakes and to, miss opportunities, but it is unforgivable not to learn from those.
I think too, if I could just add to that, you talk about vulnerability and authenticity, and one of the, we'll call it a model, but here's just reality. It starts with you, right? If you're not able to be authentic with yourself and start within here and be aligned with who you are and how you want to do things, you can't then therefore impact others. And then your company then can't therefore impact your customers, your employees, the communities that you're in. You have to start with yourself and start being real there. If you are at war with any decision, or you're not acting in alignment where you feel something, but you're doing or being something else, you can't generate founder relationships in a company that has that solid foundation that we've been talking about. And when those things come up, one of the models which is a real framework that we use, is called the SBI model, Situation, Behavior, Impact. And whenever we bring forward conversations that need to occur, that's how we frame it, because it strips all the emotion out of it. It requires preparation enough for you to pressure test yourself to make sure you're living in alignment with yourself so you can better and further align with your team. And then everybody's centering around the impact at the end. If we keep doing this around this situation and being this way, we can't or can further impact. We're either going to force multiply or we're going to fall off. So the impact of these behaviors and the impact of these decisions is what? And if you can quantify those, I think that's a really clear, clean-cut way to be able to cut through some of the noise.
Let's be real too. At the end of the day, people know when you're being authentic. They know if you have their back, if you care, through actions you've done as a founder, as a CEO. And if you have that, you have the ability, a license to say anything and communicate anything. And they know it's from a place that is like protecting them, that you care about them, that it's not mean-spirited. At the end of the day, you're trying to help them. And I think that's something that people instantly know if you're for them or if you're against them. And if you're a transactional founder and you're compartmentalizing everything and you're like, you put up those walls and guards, it's going to be very difficult because nobody's going to see you as authentic. They see the business matters more and they're just disposable. And at the end of the day, that's a false pretense. Like, you do not get anywhere without a great team, and you cannot do it alone. There's not a single entrepreneur that can do everything by themselves. So I think that's important. Going back to culture too, there's one thing I want to add there. So critical from an actionable standpoint. I think culture is the X factor. I think it's the hidden gem that most people, it's elusive. It's different. Everyone describes they have a great culture, but it's very difficult for them to articulate exactly what it is and to promote it. I think a lot of times great culture doesn't get advertised enough in an authentic way. The biggest test here on culture is, would you want to hang out with everyone when you're not required to, right? Do you have relationships? Do you have conversations? Do you actually enjoy hanging out together? That's, to me, what a great culture is. And as a CEO, as a founder, you want to pin every one of your culture values, your statements, whatever it is, tie it back to, and I think Rick said this, is, you want something that is like, recognizing those actions, those, demonstrations of your culture, but make sure you tie it back, connect the dots. I just see too often cultures up on a poster on a wall, but in implementation, nobody even knows what the values are because they're not built into the system. You've got to tie it back so that, this is actionable and we're reinforcing this culture. And then it just becomes part of the oxygen that everyone's consuming, and they don't even think twice. We talked a little bit before the call about, how good Disney is, right? About training and programming, and how today people that have left Disney years and years later, wink, Bob, that they're still doing things, right, that are just part of their DNA because they were trained the right way on what to do. And I think that's the secret sauce. Building a great culture, got to tie it back to actionable things that you're reinforcing within your business. And it's something that takes time, and you will not see that you're moving the needle initially, but over time you'll look and go, holy cow, like it's everywhere permeated within my organization. But it took a lot. It's like a marathon. It takes a long time to get there.
I love that you use the word oxygen. We had this conversation after doing an after action review for a client. And what we said is, it's like describing the wind, this clear stuff that just blows. Like, what? Like, you don't know what wind is unless you know what wind is, right? And so it's hard to describe and it's hard to articulate. And I think all the frameworks that we've talked about, the structure, the organization, the discipline, the rigor, I mean, you're really trying to take the intangible aspects of an organization and make them tangible. And that's one of the hardest things to do and put your finger on. And I think the description would be, it's not just what you're doing, it's how you're going about doing it, right? Culture really is, if Bob needs to stab Susie in the back in accounting in order to get invoices paid, that's your culture. I mean, it lives out loud all the time. And so I think you're
just
exactly
carry a sharp knife. Is that what you're proposing, Carrie?
Yeah, right.
Sharper knife than the other person. Be quick.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing that I ran into early in my career that anybody who's interested in this ought to take a look. It's called When to Take My Name Off the Door. I joined Leobert in advertising 10 years after he died. And this 4 minutes was the best cultural imprint of an organization I have ever seen. And he basically made the point that, we're about the people, we're about making great advertising. And when this comes down to the number of windows in your office, or, the sort of how fast you get stuff done, or we turn this into some sort of assembly line, then I'll insist you take my name off the door. And I mean, I was literally sitting in meetings 10 years after this man was dead, and people would turn to each other and say, what would Leo do? Okay, so I just wanted, it is really a great 4-minute watch. And I think to Carrie's point, this is about what oxygen do we create as leaders in our companies. And I think I learned from one of the best after he was gone.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. That's a great. I'll check that out a little bit later. Wanted to actually go to the chat. We have Joshua Thomas. He asked, when you hire someone, do you view them through the lens of could they be a founder, or do you look for employees as well? So I'll toss that to the group.
I think it's both. I mean, the reality is it's like what's their the strengths, how are they wired? What's in their DNA? I mean, somebody that wants to potentially be a part of something, be an owner, they want to invest, in that way. I think it's powerful that you can take them on that ride, that journey, and you can get them where they want to go. But then there's others that, I mean, we've had phenomenal employees and they've been just an employee. But I mean, they've been game changing. They just didn't necessarily want to take risks. They definitely wanted something a little bit more comfortable and more of a safety. And that's okay. Like, it takes a village. It takes everybody playing different parts and roles to make the performance pop, to make it amazing. So, I mean, I really look at it both. It depends on, getting to know them and what are their goals, aspirations, and try and figure out how under your roof, your 4 walls, you can get them there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just add one quick thing to what James said. I think the bar for founders is much higher for a lot of reasons. And I also think that the best predictor of future performance is previous performance. So I would certainly say, as I think about picking founders, I'm looking for people that have demonstrated in their past that they've got the primordial soup necessary to do the nearly impossible job of being a co-founder. So I do think there's a higher bar there.
We talked before too about how you have to be sort of cut from a different cloth or have a different DNA to do all the things that we do. And if the sentiment of culture kills strategy, eat strategy for breakfast, whatever it may be. The one thing that kills culture and strategy is ego. And it's very, very hard to determine who has an ego on your team unless you spend some time with them. And the other bar that needs to be set is, if you were to exit or you were to sell or you were to hit IPO, are you going to want to celebrate and give the percentages and the commitment and the equity to the team that you've committed, that you've all worked for? Or are you going to look at them across that moment and say, dang it, they didn't earn it with me. I did most of it, or they don't deserve it. And you're already stuck in it, right? Because you have all these contracts and operating agreements and all that stuff. And so along the way, ask yourself that, are we operating out of ego? Or are we operating as one? And when we hit our big moments, are we really going to feel like we all shared in it? And that, to me, is the level that foundership should be.
I agree. One other question that was sent over was, can you share about the economic framework that you follow as you're creating a founding team? And I know there's a lot of variables there, but if you want to mention a couple things that you consider as you're splitting up equity, profit sharing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean,
I think
I'm sorry, go on, Sherry.
I was gonna say it's
I
funny
was
because we're
gonna,
all silent. Like it's hard. It's a hard question. Yeah.
it's a hard question. I just would throw out one thing that was kind of unique that we did at Avant. We were an LLC, and one of the members was challenging to deal with. So we created a management incentive pool. This is not for founders, but more key contributors. The great thing with the incentive pool, there were a couple of really good things, unique things about it, but you had to be there at the end to get your part of it, which I think is really important. It also, because it was kind of it kind of floated on top of the purchase price, so it was protected from dilution, which was a benefit. So there were some real unique aspects of this plan, but it wasn't a traditional kind of options or what have you. LLCs can be challenging because of tax ramifications. And we were, an LLC doing business and placing employees in 45 states. So, that was a commitment to get a K1.
Sure.
No, absolutely.
I think that's where both Carrie and Sherry and Rick had said, have good expert advice, right? Find the right people that have been through it enough times. That's not something you want to try and figure out solo on your own. That's one thing I'd say.
I agree. I think one thing I'd point back to is when you get down to divvying up how much of the cap table do you give, each of the co-founders, I think it's a really great test of that whole sort of understanding what each other brings uniquely and sort of how easily do we align, because, at least in my experience, you have a pretty good idea of who's going to be the heaviest lifter of this and what role, and it kind of lets the cap table. When we did this for Inventure, I think we got down to this is fair based on what each one of us brings to the table. And so I do think it's a bit of a test of founders to figure out if you can get to something everybody says that seems fair.
Yeah, it seems if you can find peace there, you probably can find peace throughout the life cycle of the company, right?
Yes.
That sets the foundation, that sets the tone. Any final thoughts here amongst the panelists? Well, I really appreciate the time. I think it's really interesting in terms of when you're selecting your founding team, getting the right mix, understanding what everybody brings to the team, understanding that everybody has a like awareness and a like objective of values that are going to be consistent throughout, that are consistently reaffirmed throughout the life cycle. A mentality of grit is something that seems to be a must as a co-founder, and ultimately, it's crafting the culture that helps carry and make that ride enjoyable. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate the insights this morning. We're excited about the ribbon cutting, and thank you for joining us.